wonderful story of love. Tell it to me again, wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain, angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away, wonderful story of love. Still he doth call today, calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, e'en from the dawn of creation. Wonderful story of love. 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 Jesus provides a rest. Wonderful story of love. For all the pure and blessed, rest in those mansions above us, with those who've gone on before us, singing the rapturous chorus. Wonderful story of love. 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 Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sign. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of him in glory will the toils of life repay. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Onward to
Luke 22 and 31 says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. There are events in the scripture that are repeated from time to time. Not because there's nothing new that's going on, but because something unfinished is being effectuated. And when the Spirit preserves both scenes for us, we're meant to recognize the connection and to kind of pay attention to what is there. The life of Peter is recorded like that. And I say the life of Peter, we don't actually get anything about the life of Peter other than from the time we're introduced to him at his calling until the end. But anyway, his calling is shown to us. There's an event that is, none of the things that we're going to read tonight are going to be new. There's an event that is a great failure in his life that is shown to us. And then after the resurrection, there's a very familiar scene that unfolds again by the Sea of Galilee. And these events are not preserved just for sentiment or just to tell a good story. They are teaching us how faith actually works in life. The question before us is not what we might feel about Peter, but what the record establishes about the practice of faith through Peter. And we want to introduce Peter first. If you want to go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 5, that's going to be the first text that we draw from, Luke 5. Peter's calling was a genuine thing. We're at the Sea of Galilee in this scene. We have Peter and some other men who are fishermen, and Peter and these fishermen work through the night and they catch nothing. And Jesus speaks, and the nets fill. The boats strain, and Peter collapses, not out of exhaustion or not out of success, but he collapses because of who stands before him. We're going to read that in just a moment. And Jesus, at this point, steadies him and directs him forward. And we're going to find that Peter leaves all of this behind and follows Jesus. And so look with me in Luke chapter 5, and let's read together the first 11 verses of Luke 5. It says, on one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw two boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. And getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. But at your word, I'll let down the nets. When they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. This scene establishes the reality of Peter's calling by the Lord. And his response is not casual. And what takes place here in a relatively short period of time, I don't know how long Jesus spoke. I don't know exactly the time frame, but what took place in a relatively short period of time is this man, Peter, who up until this point did not really know the Lord at all, here's this teaching, has this event take place, and he submits his life to the authority of Christ. That's what takes place here in this short record, is this fisherman from Galilee completely changes direction in his life, recognizes the nature of the man that was before him. It's important what he says. Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. Inherent in those words is that Peter recognized that Jesus was holy. I believe that he recognized that Jesus was God and he was not worthy to be before him. And so he falls to the ground and says, depart from me, because I'm a sinful man. I don't deserve to be in your presence. That change that takes place is astounding. And this is a very genuine conversion that has taken place here. Now we're going to jump forward, skip over a lot of stuff, and go to another big event in Peter's life, because that's actually what we're focusing on, is these particular events in Peter's life, where we see Peter's failure was also as absolute as his conversion was. Years later, this same man stands by a fire one night and denies even knowing Jesus. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, with progressive succession, being more adamant each time and working to distance himself more each time that he does it. It's very public, it's very verbal, and it is absolute. He is completely disavowing any association with Jesus. And then the rooster crows. And nothing remains unclear at that point. Peter comes face to face with what he's done. Now, we didn't talk about it. We're not going to read it now. But Peter had just before this insisted that this would never happen. And that's what he comes face to face with. That it did happen. I want to turn your attention to John 18 for a moment. The Gospel of John, chapter 18. We're going to read together starting in verse 15. The record of this as it's presented to us by John. Simon Peter followed Jesus and so did another disciple. And since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood outside at the door. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. And the servant girl at the door said to Peter, "You're also one of this man's disciples, aren't you?" He said, "I am not." Now, the servants and officers made a charcoal fire because it was cold. And they were standing and warming themselves, and Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. And the high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. And Jesus answered, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple, where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I've said to them. They know what I said." And I will tell you, I've read past that verse a number of times without realizing the ones he's talking about asking are the disciples that are there with him. That would include Peter. When he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" And Jesus answered him, "If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me?" Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Now, Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You also are one of his disciples. Are you? Or not one of his disciples, are you?" And he denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter again denied it. And at once the rooster crowed. Now, I also want to go back to Luke's record in Luke 22 and read with you starting in verse 54 and look at Luke's account. There's some information there that is useful. They seized him, led him away, bringing him in the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. And the servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter, and Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. This was an absolute and utter failure by a man who had wholeheartedly and fully devoted himself to Jesus, who had spent 3 years with Jesus, who had heard all of the teaching of Jesus, who had witnessed the miracles of Jesus, and who not once, not twice, but 3 times failed in a way that cannot be minimized. And he doesn't ultimately try to minimize it. When he realizes what he's done, it says that he wept bitterly. He knew how bad he had messed up in the depth of what he had done. If faith were characterized by uniformity alone, by being consistent, Peter's story would end right here. He was not. If we fast forward, even after the things that we're going to talk about in this lesson, there is yet another well-known event in Peter's life where he fails miserably, refusing to associate with the Gentiles. If uniformity in faith was what makes faith real, then Peter had no faith. But that is not what characterizes faith. After the resurrection, Matthew chapter 28 and verse 10, Jesus directs that his disciples are to be told to go to the region of Galilee. Keep in mind that Jesus is crucified in Jerusalem. The disciples are in Jerusalem. He says, "Go and tell my brothers, go and tell the disciples that I'll go before them into Galilee and that they should meet me there." And Mark 16 verse 7 records that aspect of it. And he goes ahead of them to Galilee. And so Peter is no longer in Jerusalem. He's back in Galilee, which is where he's from. The first event that we read tonight, that's where it happened, in Galilee. He's back home. He's back at the sea. He's back in the boat. And he's doing the work that he was doing when he first met Jesus to begin with. When he has that exchange with Jesus and he throws himself down at Jesus' feet and says, "Depart from me, I'm not worthy. I'm a sinful man." And Jesus says, "Get up. You will not be fishermen anymore. You're going to go out and you're going to fish for men." He's back in that place. And he's doing what people do when they go home. When you go back to familiar surroundings, you'll go back home, you go back to The places where you've behaved in particular ways and done particular things, you tend to do those things. Look with me in John chapter 21, the first 3 verses. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way: Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. So we've got the disciples who have gone to Galilee the way that they've been instructed to, and they're sitting around back at home. And Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. Now, this is what Simon did. He had spent his whole life in Galilee fishing. And he said, I'm going fishing. And they said, we'll go with you. And they went out and got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. Now, there's the first little piece of information that ought to cause us to say, wait a minute. This is where the story started. Peter's story started having been on a fishing boat in Galilee all night and having caught no fish. And now we're at the end of the story, and Peter's back in Galilee, and he goes out on a fishing boat, and he stays out all night, and he catches no fish. The text doesn't explain his motives. I've looked at this and thought about this and wrestled with this for several weeks now. A couple of poor people in the room have had to deal with my rantings about it in the times that I was a little bit more excited about it than others. But they apparently knew why they were going back to Galilee. And they knew that they were going to be meeting Jesus there. And this is introducing how Jesus came to them in Galilee. That's why the first verse says, after this, Jesus revealed himself. They haven't seen him up to this point. They're sitting around waiting. Why he decides to go fishing, I don't know, other than the fact that he's at home. And that's what he does. He goes back to his old way of life. It's night again. He's on a fishing boat again. And he's caught nothing again. So the scene repeats. But this time there is a huge difference. Though it reads like a small thing, it's not a small thing. But between the first scene and the second, we know this. We know that Peter has grown. Peter spent 3 years being taught by the Lord. Peter spent 3 years witnessing the Lord's miracles. Peter has displayed faith. Peter has walked on the water. Peter's done a lot of things. He's grown. He's followed the Lord closely. He's been instructed. He's taken responsibility from the Lord. And this later miracle that's about to take place shows that there is a greater capacity and that there is greater steadiness in Peter. Peter is stronger than he was at the beginning of the story, and the story points that out in a very subtle way. And yet it is this stronger Peter who has denied Jesus. Not all that long ago. He's denied him 3 times, very publicly, very adamantly, very strongly, when the Lord needed him the most. Growth in faith does not eliminate the possibility of failure. The text does not allow us to equate an act of failure with the absence of growth or a collapse with the absence of sincerity. Peter's denial is not the failure of a novice. It is the failure of a disciple who has advanced, who has grown, who has increased. What growth changes is not whether failure can occur, but how someone responds to failure. Look with me, if you will, at this story, starting in verse 4 and reading through about verse 14. Just as the day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" Now, we read the first three verses just a moment ago, and we know they fished all night and what? They didn't catch anything. "Do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some." Now, here's a minor difference. In the first event, this is one of the things that tips us off that this isn't just a retelling of the first story. He doesn't tell them to go out into deeper water. We don't have they're ashore and off the boats, and then he goes on and he does the teaching, and we don't have any of that. He simply says, "Cast the nets on the right side of the boat, and you'll catch some fish." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in. That's the net. They're not able to haul in the net because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." This is John. Now, keep in mind, if you go back to the first story, John and his brother were with Peter and his brothers fishing partners. John was there at the first time too. John recognizes something about this event. And when this happens, and it's happening now again for the second time in these folks' life, that they've spent all night fishing, not caught anything, and then had this man walk up and say, "Do this," and then they've had this catch. He said, "It's the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea. And the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. And when they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, the fish laid out on it, and bread. And Jesus said, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. Listen closely. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said, "Come and have breakfast." The net was not torn. That difference matters. We're told in the first event that the nets were breaking. And we're told this time specifically that they didn't. Between the first scene and the second, Peter has grown. And that's being demonstrated by these events through these nets, which now are able to hold up under the strain. This latter miracle shows greater capacity and greater steadiness. Peter is now stronger like the net, and Jesus is teaching him this. We want to look next at the response, what happens after this. Jesus doesn't ignore what had happened. Jesus doesn't ignore Peter's denial. He doesn't pretend that it didn't matter. He, in fact, brings it up and addresses it through three questions that correspond to those three denials. There's a reason Jesus asked Peter three times, "Do you love me?" Because Peter had denied him three times. Look with me, starting in verse 15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John." Notice he's speaking directly to Simon. "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" I never was really sure why that grieved him. Now I think I know. Peter wasn't stupid. Peter knew exactly what was going on here. He said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." This is not to humiliate Peter, but he's bringing the matter fully into the open. And you notice Peter doesn't argue with him. And he doesn't promise anything. He's done that many times before, right? "You're going to do this." "No, Lord, I'll never do that. We'll never let that happen, Lord." No, he doesn't do any of that. He simply appeals to what Jesus already knows. Peter's learned something. You know, Lord. You know the answer to your question before you even ask it. You know that I love you. But he asked him again, and he asked him again. And Peter sees the parallel. Jesus is publicly reaffirming Peter's role in his service. You remember the first thing that he says to Peter? "Put those nets down and you come follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men, gatherers of men." You notice what he says here after he's denied him three times? "Do you love me? You know that I love you. Feed my sheep." Not once, not twice, but three times. You have a job to do. I have called you to a task. Do it. Peter belonged. This exchange does not determine whether Peter belonged. That question had already been answered. Jesus referred to the disciples as his brothers in Matthew 28 and verse 10 when he directed them to go to Galilee. "You go to my brothers and tell them they're going to see me in Galilee." And in fact, in Mark 16 and verse 7, Mark's account of that, Peter is actually named, the only one that's specifically named. "You go and tell the disciples and Peter to go to Galilee." But what this moment determines is whether Peter can move forward truthfully, having failed. Can he move forward now having been restored? You'll remember the promise of the Lord. Peter told him, the Lord told Peter, "You will falter, but when you are restored, strengthen your brothers." Jesus is teaching Peter, it's time for you to start doing that. You're past this now. You made a mistake. Now move on from it. The meeting by the sea doesn't generate the restoration. It completes what was already happening. And it is the Lord's way of encouraging his disciple. What this record establishes is that faith can be real and still falter under pressure. What this establishes is that spiritual growth does not guarantee immunity from mistakes. What this establishes is that failure does not automatically cancel someone's calling in the Lord. It establishes that restoration has to be honest, that it has to be measured, and that it needs to be direct. Jesus pulls this out into the open. He intentionally makes Peter confront the three denials so that Peter can come to realize that Jesus hadn't given up on him and that his hope was not gone. Peter, I called you to gather men. I'm telling you, get busy doing it. Feed my sheep. It's the way that the story is told. It's the way that Jesus acts within the story. It's the way that Peter acts within the story. It's the way that Jesus performs the act. The reason why he has them go to Galilee, the reason why they're fishing again, the reason why they catch no fish again is precisely so there can be a recreation of the events that first brought Peter to faith. So Peter can realize and remember who he is. I worked for a number of years with a man named Jack Holt. He used to say the Bible does not deal in the trivial. He hated, and I mean despised, Bible trivia games. There is no trivia in the Bible. Every single word is important. And the way it is told is important. And this is proof of that. Peter's story is not preserved to excuse failure. That's not the point at all. It's not to make me feel good about the fact that I've messed up. Nor should it be trying to make you feel good about the fact that maybe you've messed up at some point. It is preserved to show how Christ is willing to deal with it, how Christ is willing to continue to abide and be patient and work with us and give us the opportunity. Faith is serious enough to be tested. And what I mean by that is we shouldn't give up on faith just because there is a test. It's serious enough to go through the test. It's serious enough to have the experience. It's serious enough to run the risk of making a misstep and making a fool out of ourselves. Because faith is serious. And grace is serious enough to restore. Christ doesn't abandon those that he has called. And lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the age. You know what Jesus doesn't say? Lo, I am with you always unless. He didn't say that. He says, lo, I am with you always. That did not change. He meets his servants when and where they return after things fall apart. Peter had a bad night. And Peter still hadn't put everything back together. But on this night, actually this morning, this early morning, things are finally put back together. That failure is brought into the light, and Jesus directs those who have failed to move forward in their service. Okay, you've done it. You've owned it. Put it behind you. Forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal of the upward call of Christ. This is what the record shows us. And because it's what the record shows, it's how we must practice our faith. Yes, there will be days that test our faith. Yes, there will be days that we will fail. Not anything to be proud about, not anything to glory in. In fact, we probably should react to them much the same way that Peter did. When we realize what we've done, we should go out and weep bitterly. But it does not need to be the end of our service. It does not need to be the end of our story. It does not need to be the end of our fellowship with God. Too many people quit because they mess up. Judas quit because he messed up. He didn't have to. Peter shows us that we don't have to. And Peter shows us that the process can make us stronger. Actually, Peter doesn't show us that. Jesus shows us that through Peter. And through the way in which he worked a miracle, in which the first catch, he had the nets breaking and the boat sinking. In the second catch, the nets held. You can be better on the other side of it. You can be stronger on the other side of it. You can be more faithful on the other side of it. You don't have to be defined by your failures. You can learn, you can grow, and you can increase in faith. In weakness, I have been made strong. There is something to learn in that. If you're here and you've had struggles and you have made missteps and you have said the wrong thing or done the wrong thing or tried to distance yourself from your faith or hide your faith, that does not mean that you do not have faith. That does not mean that you are not a child of God. Jesus called Peter his brother, despite the fact that he had done all those things. That does not mean that your story is over. That does not mean that you gave it the old college try, but you just couldn't hold on. That means you fell down. And Jesus is there to lift you up again and to ask you, do you love me? And if you can say, Jesus, you know that I do, then his instruction to Peter is his instruction to you. Feed my sheep. Go out and do the work that I've called you to do. Go out and be the person that I've called you to be. Go out and give the example that I've called you to give. Be the wife that I've called you to be. Be the husband that I've called you to be. Be the friend that I've called you to be. Be the neighbor that I've called you to be. Be the citizen that I've called you to be. Be the leader that I've called you to be. Be the boss that I've called you to be. Be the employee that I've called you to be. Whatever it is, be what it is that I call you to be in spite of your worst day. And never grow weary in well doing. For in due time you will reap if you do not grow weary. That's the story. That's why that story is told twice. The fishing story. And it's not even the case that one of the fishing stories is better than the other, that the going out to the deep one is better, or that the casting on the other side one is better. I think the song is about casting on the other side. It's not that one of those stories is better than the other. It takes both of them to teach the lesson. Because the lesson is not about the fish, the lesson's about the net. And you're the net. Think about those things. If you're here and your net has torn and you need to be mended, the Lord is ready to mend you. And if we can help you in regard to that, let it be known as we stand and sing.
Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love.